Throughout the course of medieval and early modern European history, there appear various themes among the intellectual discourse of the time, which to the modern mind may seem limited in scope. Theological writing and, at the end of the period, Protestant theological arguments, as well as other heated areas of discourse and debate among Christian scholars, make up a large percentage of thought and intellectual inquiry during the nearly 1,000 years after the fall of Rome and into the Renaissance. Often overlooked, and perhaps understandably so, we sometimes find small groups of men and women whose thought and behavior in their time fell so drastically outside the scope of mainstream intellectual thought and Christian discourse that it baffles scholars. These strange people and groups oftentimes have proven to have great influence that was not so immediately apparent to their contemporaries, and perhaps even not so immediately apparent for many today. With the benefit of hindsight as historians, we're able to parse together pieces of these strange people and groups, the outliers of history, the men and women who shaped our world in ways only apparent centuries later, and in ways counter to the prevailing sentiment and behavior of the age they lived in. A close examination of these strange medieval historical groups and figures is not to discount the prevailing, mainly theological discourse of the day, but rather to attempt to add to the overall and often overlooked rich landscape of behavior and thought which riddles the early to late medieval period and makes it such a fascinating time to study. One such group, which arose mainly at the bookend of the late medieval period in 15th century England, whose everlasting effect on Western thought and science, and whose ideas reverberate into all facets of modern life today, were an underground group of men who obsessed and revered the spherical and perfect form of the orb. Today, we take a Skeleton Realm history deep dive into one of history's greatest mysteries, the Orbsmen. Like many of the small fringe groups which arose throughout the fractured and splintered cultural landscape of the early medieval period in Europe, little is known about the Orbsmen's origins. The earliest known mention of the Orbsmen comes from Rondici III, a small, frail man who lived inside a large cavernous hole in Lombardy sometime between 556 and 600. He spent his lifetime compiling a voluminous chronicling of the region's history. Hidden deep within volume 54 of his Historia Hominum Alienorum, or History of Strange Men, we find mention of a group of individuals with an orb obsession, popping into Rondici's region for a time, coveting and transporting perfect orbs through the Alps.
And it was in that day that the orbers came about, the men who loved orbs, men who transported the balls to Gaul through the mountain pass. These men were known in Rome as the Orbi and had no wives. They loved the round orbs in the manner that a man would love his wife, perhaps originating from the Byzantine Historia Hominum Alienorum Rundici, 6th century.
It would be another 800 years before any mention of the Orbsmen would surface in the written historical record. However, several archaeological findings dating to the late 10th and early 11th century in northwestern France give us a clue into what, if any, activity this underground group of orb-transporting and loving men may have been engaged in during the period. In 1996, Jacques Lorange and a team of archaeologists from Cambridge discovered a forgotten cemetery outside of modern-day Rennes. Lorange and his team discovered the burial site of over a dozen men who lived sometime between 980 and 1066. Seemingly hidden on purpose, their bodies were buried in a low-lying bog at an astounding depth of nearly 100 feet. Along with ornate and impressive golden jewelry, large swords, armor, and beautiful gems, each man had been buried with a perfect porcelain orb placed on his chest. The craftsmanship required to create such orbs previously was not thought to be available until centuries later, and the discovery shocked archaeologists. Inscriptions on the men's armor and swords revealed that they were members of an elite group which pledged their allegiance to the orbs. They called themselves the Orbis Protector, or Orb Protectors. The findings were controversial to say the least, and many historians claim that the burial site was a planted hoax, some going as far as to accuse L'Orange himself as faking the discovery, pointing to the fact that L'Orange is himself obsessed with and identifies as an orb lover. Opponents of L'Orange cite as evidence that the fact that L'Orange's home in Paris is full of orbs. Nevertheless, it is clear that somehow, eventually, the Orbsmen made their way into England, possibly during the Norman conquest of 1066, as the historical record does show of Norman Frankish noblemen who, during the invasion of 1066, built and navigated a special private ship across the English Channel, trailing William the Conqueror's invasion fleet by several weeks and waltzing onto the battlefield with their orbs after the dirty work had been done, giving us the modern English phrase orb waltzer, or a person who enters into a task late, doing nothing, and declaring victory or credit as if they had participated when they did not. Perhaps the only surviving evidence of the Orbsmen's role in the Battle of Hastings was tragically destroyed. A tapestry which hung inside Richmond Castle in North Yorkshire, the estate of Alan the Red, a Breton nobleman and kinsman companion of William the Conqueror. The cloth was burned up in a fire in 1938 and destroyed. Unfortunately, 0 photographs were ever taken of the tapestry. It is said that in the foreground, the depiction of a group of men exiting a ship holding white orbs can be faintly seen and is a possible depiction of Orbsmen. For the next several hundred years, Orbsmen disappeared, until 1452, when a flourishing of orb culture and literature pertaining to Orbsmen lifestyle enters the historical record en masse. Small handwritten letters, short manuscripts, and inscriptions appear all of the sudden and point to an incredibly rich, yet still somewhat under-the-radar group of orb-loving men. The most famous work of the period is undoubtedly the Orbers Codex, a written work laying out all the customs and habits of the Orbsmen and their rules for daily life. Authorship of the Codex has been attributed to several historical figures of the era, and historians still disagree widely on the topic. Many attribute the Codex's creation to Lord Orber, a wealthy landed elite who gave away all his land holdings one day to build an orb-shaped home constructed deep underground somewhere in the English Midlands, the location of which is still unknown to this day. But it's made reference to in a number of contemporary letters and writings, the most notable being Lord Horringsworth, 3rd Duke of Cornbury's letter to his brother, Richard Horringsworth, a London merchant, in 1482.
Come then to Cornbury, brother, and bring us thou most ornate dress. The Christmas feast of our Lord is sure to delight us all this year. I must warn thee, however, when approaching the path from Bournemouth to Cornbury, be aware that there is a strange man living at the westerly path's intersection, or within 1 mile thence. He is living underground in a round sphere. Please do not tread on his land, for if you do, this man is much dismayed and arises from his hole, throwing hard orbs and screaming loudly. Be careful, my brother, on this journey. Lord Horringsworth to Richard Horringsworth, 1482.
Lord Orber, it is said, was also the organizational figurehead of the Orbsmen movement during this time, organizing local chapters of orb-loving men across England and delivering hard, small orbs to members of this fledgling secret society. In the Codex, we read about the initiation ritual which took place, usually in a cave or hole. The ritual involved elder orbers pouring 4 quarts of Lord Orber's special orb slime over the new member's face. The slime was hot, and the new tortured orber no doubt would never forget this initiation. Another fascinating look into this strange group that the Codex provides is the dress, social, and eating behaviors of the Orbsmen. In one chapter, we find reference to the traditional Orbsman garb and the strict requirements of members to adorn a particular dress code.
And let it be said, the Orber does not mind showing his upper thighs and lower buttocks. The Orber does not have shame, yet not as the Adamites. The orber must cover his bosom and belly, as well as his male member, but the orber need not cover his thighs, and rather is encouraged to display them for all to see. The Orbers Codex, Chapter 4, Part 3.
Another strange reference to Orber style requires members to strive for what it calls insane freakishness.
And also let it be said that the orber should strive in every way to promote the orbs which we do hold so dear, and to bring attention to themselves in order to promote the orbs. This can be achieved by high-pitched screaming and erratic movements of the body. It is required for the orber to behave and act in an insane, freakish manner in order to draw attention to himself and the orbs which we do hold dear. The Orbers Codex, Chapter 4, Part 8.
The Codex's obsession with appearances is clear in its final chapter as well, which is a drawn-out instructional section based around how and in what manner an orber should consume food and beverage. Throughout the chapter, the writer explains that becoming large and obese is a tenet of orber culture.
To become an obese orber is the greatest achievement a man can hope for. Let us praise the obese orber. The larger one's body is, the easier it will be for the laymen to see you, and by extension, the orb which you do hold so tightly and display. Consume each fortnight 205 quarts of butter. The Orbers Codex, Chapter 8, Part 2.
However detailed the Codex is about the practices of this strange group, it seems to present many unanswered questions. Namely, what were the members' beliefs and reasons for obsessing over the orbs? Pages of detailed descriptions of initiation rituals, as well as handshakes and dances, flood the Codex. Yet not once is any explanatory purpose or ideology tied to the worship of the orb ever fleshed out, and as such, the Orbsmen remain one of the most mysterious groups to arise throughout this era. Dating to around the time of the Codex's writing, archaeologists also discovered in 2006 a 3-foot in diameter buried wooden orb container, housing several dozen flat stones with various inscriptions on them. Many of the inscriptions have yet to be deciphered, but the ones that have shocked historians and remain extremely controversial to this day. On one stone, cryptographers have ascertained that Einstein's theory of relativity is clearly and plainly written, along with equations and theories surrounding gravity and Newtonian physics, some 200 years before Newton was born. Perhaps most astoundingly, a diagram of a 1972 Ford Pinto is also clearly inscribed on one of the stones. Was this buried wooden orb a nest full of Orbers stones? Or just a dang prank? The findings are rarely discussed in academic circles, and discussion of the tablets has resulted in the loss of tenure by dozens of professors over the years, leading many to believe that the stone tablets are part of an intricate, forbidden private history covered up by elites. Proponents of the Orb Lords created science theory, or OLCST, point to the stone tablets as proof that the Orbers created science. It was a cold and rainy day in January 1486, as the marriage service between the newly crowned King Henry VII and his bride Elizabeth of York took place at Westminster, and a group of orb-obsessed, freakishly dressed and obese orbsmen gathered outside the sanctuary with their thighs completely exposed, waiting for the newlywed monarchs to exit. The moments that followed would be known as the Orbers Incident for centuries to come, and would seal the orbsmen's fate and reputation. Accounts of the incident vary among contemporaries, but one thing is certain. One or more orbs were thrown with great force towards Elizabeth, smashing against her face and knocking her out cold. Whether by accident or on purpose, the orbers in attendance of the event, some 300 men, were quickly apprehended and thrown into the Tower of London, where they awaited trial for conspiracy against the crown and attempted regicide. A long, drawn-out trial finally ended in the spring of 1486, which resulted in the execution of all 300 oarsmen, and the codification into law making possession or creation of an orb illegal and punishable by torture and death. It was this moment in history that the Orbsmen will perhaps always be known for, and it's what brought them to prominence for both future historians and their contemporaries. Arising from a small underground cohort into an infamous herd of villainized freaks to a totally forgotten group. Who were the Orbers? Were they merely eccentric freaks who loved orbs, or something more? What contributions did Orbers make to modern science, and how much of their influence is being covered up by nasty elites who seek to hide the truth? How does one explain the codex, the stone tablets? As more information arises about the Orbsmen and their mysterious practices, contemporary historians may be able to one day give us a clearer picture as they continue to piece together clues about this peculiar group. Until then, who the Orbers really were will remain one of history's greatest mysteries. Hey guys, thanks for checking out this episode of Skeleton Realm History. I want to take a second to thank the sponsor for today's video, Orbsmen, who provided the funding and all the research materials for this episode. Have you been thinking about getting into the orb game but don't know where to start? Orbsmen offers both entry-level and professional-style orbs for any type of orber. Give the gift of orbing this holiday season with one of Orbsmen's regular-style white orbs and spread the love of orb to your friends and family. Use promo code SkellyOrb, that's Skelly O-R-B, at checkout and receive a 15% discount on orders over $500. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more Skeleton Realm history videos, a new series produced in conjunction with some of our favorite brands.